We've all been there. You spend hours hunched over a textbook, dragging a neon highlighter across every other sentence, cramming for a test until your eyes blur. You pass the exam, but 3 days later, the information is entirely gone. That frustration happens because we treat the human brain like a computer hard drive, assuming that if we read the material enough times, we can simply hit download and store the data. True learning is an intensely physical process. Your brain must physically build and dismantle the microscopic connections between neurons to adapt to new information. When we rely heavily on repetition and memorization, we're engaging in what educational philosopher Benjamin Bloom called shallow learning. Highlighting a page only activates the most basic memory networks in your brain. The higher order areas responsible for deep understanding and critical thinking are left completely out of the loop. From an evolutionary standpoint, your brain prioritizes efficiency and survival. Building new neural pathways requires a massive amount of biological energy, and your mind refuses to spend that energy unless it has a reason. Until you give your mind a compelling, survival-level reason to trigger that physical construction project, standard study habits remain a temporary illusion. To force the brain to rewire itself, you have to get past its primary gatekeeper, emotion. Specifically, personal meaning. Imagine two people taking a wine tasting course. One is deeply passionate about the subject, while the other is just tagging along. 2 years later, the passionate person is a connoisseur, while the other remembers almost nothing. The sensory input was identical, but only the person who attributed deep emotional meaning to the experience retained it. This physical rewiring can happen even without words. We call this behavioral learning, and it happens entirely through your sensory and motor channels. Picture an 18th century sailor stationed high up in the crow's nest of a ship, tasked with spotting land across a vast, featureless ocean. That sailor didn't rely on superhuman genetics. Over time, through intense focus and endless repetition, the visual processing network in his brain physically altered itself to handle highly sophisticated visual messages. Language is rarely a prerequisite here. Intense, meaningful interaction with the physical world triggers the same biological transformation. Another powerful shortcut to rewiring the brain is social learning. As human beings, our survival has always depended on our ability to fit into a group. This happens because of mirror neurons. These are specialized nerve cells that automatically sync up your physical actions and emotional states with the people around you. Sometimes this synchronization overrides basic logic. It explains why a toddler might unconsciously start mimicking a friend's stutter, or how a crowd of rational adults can be manipulated into buying terrible timeshare apartments by planted actors showing fake enthusiasm. But when you want to absorb complex information, you need to engage in knowledge learning. This requires breaking the brain out of its stereotypical, highly efficient categorization habits. One of the oldest strategies to do this is a Socratic argument, or what ancient Talmudic scholars called quibbling. It forces the brain to process raw information in multidimensional ways. By learning in pairs and debating seemingly trivial details, students create a specific mental tension. That slight stress sharpens their concentration and pushes the material into long-term memory. Whether it happens through the pressure of a social group or an intense, focused debate, introducing cognitive friction is the only way to pull the brain off autopilot and force it to adapt. These emotional and behavioral adjustments have long-term consequences. In the famous marshmallow test, researchers found that the ability to manage impulses in childhood correlated with greater success and resilience decades later. Those children who resisted eating the marshmallow practiced emotional regulation that built higher emotional intelligence, which they carried into adulthood. Here is the harsh reality. Because learning is a literal construction project, your brain demands physical building materials. You cannot create these new networks without proper nutrition, adequate deep sleep, and manageable stress levels. This explains why marathon cramming sessions fail on a biological level. The brain becomes overwhelmed with raw data and is starved of the structured rest it needs to physically synthesize those chemical connections. To genuinely absorb information, you have to work with your biology. Drop the highlighter, space out your study sessions over several days, and most importantly, find a way to make the material matter to you emotionally.